Hello, everybody. Um, I am Dan Spiro. I'm the president of the Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society of Washington, also known as JIDS. And I wanted to welcome you to this virtual meeting today on the topic of Israel-Palestine. Um, JIDS has been around for 17 years. We are a big ideological tent dialogue society. And we've been putting on many programs about Israel-Palestine, about theology, about rituals, about what unifies Jews, Muslims, and allies, and what divides us. So we have an incredible program planned for you today. I want to start with introducing Ari Roth, who's been a partner in crime of mine for like 16 plus years.
Hi, Ari.
One of the great theater directors in the Washington, D.C. area, and also a extremely experienced activist on the topic of Middle East peace. So without further ado, Ari, I turn the program over to you.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dan. I'm a longtime admirer of yours, of the Spinoza Society, and of course of JIDS, which is celebrating its 17th year. A salute to everybody who makes JIDS run. I wanted to just set context by sort of repeating what's brought us here, and that's Dan's invitation to engage in a topic that's meant a lot to him and the framers of today's conversation, which I believe includes Jim Vitarello and Ira Weiss and plenty others too. For years, the voices heard the loudest on Israel-Palestine have been the extremist ones. Moderate, conciliatory voices abound, but what have they to say that seems to fall on deaf ears? Why is that? Or as I would say, ask, is that in fact true? But to continue with the initial invitation that's brought us here, why do those who speak in one-sided and largely vituperative terms play such an outsized role in shaping the discourse? And of course, we should ask, what kind of discourse are we talking about on social media, through the United Nations, in the halls of Congress? Why have the compromisers been so unsuccessful in building coalitions that cut across social divides? That's the topic of today's conversation. Why are moderate voices so impotent and extremist voices so powerful? A look at Israel, Palestine, and beyond. The title of today's dialogue reflects how alienated many people feel when they advocate compromise solutions based on taking into account both the Israeli and Palestinian narratives, yet sense that the only people getting traction are the extremist voices who speak passionately and exclusively for one side of the conflict, not the other. However, the framers of this program recognize that the perspective isn't the only one held in this JIDS community. We acknowledge that there are asymmetries of power in the region, power that controls lives on the ground and in the law books, that constructs systems of oppression. We recognize that in the Israel-Palestine context, it's important to question what the term extremist means, what the term moderate means, as others are criticized for practicing both sidesism, ducking responsibility for taking difficult choices. So generally, we are interested, and this is JID speaking, in seeing how we can do a better job of discussing Israel-Palestine, the conflict, so that different perspectives and narratives can be heard respectfully and that we can move together forward. Now, the question that I, Ari, posed to Dan and to the other framers of this conversation a few weeks back is that there was an inherent bias in the framing of this question. that we could acknowledge that we are indeed living in harrowing times. These are also what we call binary times, and the moral and political absolutes define the movement landscape of today. Social media, we all know, provides trending traction for the passionate, for the outrageous, for the radical, for the extreme. The algorithm preferences it because it feeds the beast of the human appetite of bloodlust. The critique of that passion, that mode of presentation, that it's somehow intellectually inferior, spiritually or Talmudically inferior. Are we, is Daniel, is JIDS supporting a notion that moderation is the golden mean? Is the extreme really a pejorative? Or is it merely another word for clarity, for moral responsibility, for a moral imperative, the pure pursuit of justice? Now, I brought this question to my family, particularly a 24 and 30-year-old niece and nephew. Both are Jewish day school educated, fluent speakers of Hebrew, students today of Arabic, one writing a dissertation on Hannah Arendt, both avowed anti-Zionists. They reject this JIDS formulation outright. Why? Because in their view, the moderates have been in a position that's governed for decades and has failed. They've made proposals, and those proposals were ineffectual. They built the institutions, designed the media protocols of journalism and beyond that led to the current state of systemic oppression that we have. Moderation has allowed for a power grab. Call it a colonial or imperial power grab. Call it a supremacist ethos. That's what you're defending, they believe, when you defend a practice of moderation. Of course, as we were arguing over dinner at a restaurant, I said this was hogwash, this idea. The center, the moderate position, has been pulverized by the extremes. Oslo was decimated by right-wing settler violence and suicide bomber martyrology. Oslo was just a footbridge to lead Israelis and Palestinians to a far steeper, more ambitious bridge to traverse. The initiative was destroyed, not corrupted from within. Take one more example. Is a label in the eye of the beholder or in the mind of the believer? In the case of Democrat New York Representative Daniel Goldman, for example, a freshman congressman from New York's 10th district representing Brooklyn and Manhattan, and a former federal prosecutor who gained prominence as the lead counsel for the House Democrats in Trump's first impeachment inquiry in 2019. Daniel Goldman is endorsed both by J Street and AIPAC. Adored by some, detested by others, he believes himself to be a progressive. Others call him a moderate. To me, he represents the idea of someone who thinks of himself one way, but is regarded entirely differently. He says, I think I have a very progressive approach to Israel and to my support for the U.S.-Israel relationship. I stand in a progressive camp as opposed to a moderate camp. Goldman has earned this imprimatur from J Street and from AIPAC together. But to his critics, they see him as a progressive except for Palestine. That's the new label, progressive except for Palestine. The question that we now will debate and hear, for not so much debate, but hear much more learned thoughts and meditations are from Nizar Farsakh and from Rabbi Professor Marc Gopin. Before I introduce them and read their bios quickly, let's just quickly define those terms more specifically extreme, and moderate simply by using a dictionary. Extreme. The definitions are to reach for the highest degree, unusual, exceptional, severe, far from moderate, denoting or relating to a sport performed in a hazardous environment involving great physical risk. Those are the variations on the of definition for extreme. Moderate is the more elastic definition in that it's both an adjective, a noun, and a verb. As an adjective, moderate denotes being average in amount, average in quality or degree, not radical or excessive. As a verb, to moderate is to make something less extreme, rigorous, or less violent, to have a moderating influence. It's also to preside over a panel, to moderate a panel. And finally, of course, it's to monitor, or as like an internet forum for in or to monitor inappropriate content. Let's turn to introduce our two panelists. Nizar Farsakh is a Palestinian-American political analyst, educator, and thought leader with deep expertise in the Israel-Palestine context, U.S. Middle East policy, and Palestinian public diplomacy. As a consultant, he helps groups achieve breakthroughs on Israel-Palestine by sharing insights, bridging perspectives, and sparking change. He's currently a lecturer of international affairs at the George Washington University Elliott School, where he teaches graduate level negotiation and leadership skills. He studied at American University of Beirut and worked as a researcher in the West Bank, joined the Palestinian negotiating team, and participated in second track talks and people-to-people initiatives. In the U.S., he's worked at the Palestinian Representative Office in D.C. and got involved in Arab, Muslim, and Jewish organizations. Nizar holds a Master's of Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, a Master's of Arts in International Boundary Studies from King's College in London, and a dual bachelor degrees from Beirut, American University, and Political Studies and Chemistry. He's committed to strengthening Palestinian leadership and supporting the next generation in transforming knowledge into meaningful action. His website, and we'll put it in the chat, is nizarfarsakh.com. And Rabbi Marc Gopin is the director of the Center of World Religions, Diplomacy, and Conflict Resolution, and the James H. Lau Professor at George Mason University's Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Peace and Conflict Resolution. Marc has pioneered projects at the CRDC in Afghanistan, Iran, Syria, Palestine, and Israel. Marc directs a unique overseas educational and practice program ranging from conflict and peace intervention in Palestine and Israel to support for Syrian activists and refugees in Turkey and Jordan, to pioneering educational classes in the Balkans and Northern Ireland. He's written many books with extraordinary titles. His fifth book, Bridges Across an Impossible Divide, The Inner Lives of Arab and Jewish Peacemakers, explores the role of self-examination in the resolution of human conflict as portrayed in the lives and testimonies of indigenous peacemakers. Other books include To Make the Earth Whole, The Art of Citizen Diplomacy in an Age of Religious Militancy, and his first book, Between Eden and Armageddon, The Future of World Religions, Violence, and Peacemakers. We're thrilled to have both Nizar and Marc with us. Just a few months ago, Nizar and Marc were both part of panel discussions offering feedback to the musical world premiere about the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin's life. And I got so much out of re-listening to their contributions to that conversation on our YouTube, the Voices Festival Productions YouTube channel. And I've taken some quotes from those presentations, which maybe I'll share later today. But going in alphabetical order, I'll be happy to turn over the mic now to Nizar to grapple with these terms, moderate and extreme, and help us navigate a way through. Nizar.
Thank you, Ari, and thank you for this generous introduction. Did we stick to the 20 minutes, or are we doing 5 minutes for each one?
20, we're going to do 20 at 20 and 20, and
Okay.
then we'll do a Q&A. And I should have let people know the idea will be Nizar presents for 20 minutes, Marc for 20 minutes, a Q&A with everyone here for a good 25 minutes to 30 minutes, breakouts for half an hour, and then returning to plenary for gleaning.
And
So take it away.
Nizar, if I can ask you to speak a little louder or turn up your mic just a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I guess I'll frame my my intervention on a purpose. What is your purpose? What is our purpose? Whether when it's peace, when it's equality, whatever it is, often the misunderstanding and the confusion, and in fact the extremism, often is because of lack of clarity in purpose or misunderstanding of purpose. So when we say who is moderate and who is extreme, it has to do with your purpose. What are you trying to do? Are you saying that they are extreme because they are outliers, ergo they are not representative? Are you saying they are extreme, as I like the example from the dictionary, which is sports, in as it is dangerous and risk-taking and therefore dangerous to your life, and that assumes that life and safety is more valuable than meaningful action, right? That in and of itself, calling that sport extreme, somebody else would call it life, living. One of my first experiences that was really an eye-opening experience was when I went to study at the American University of Beirut. It was 1992, just a year after the Civil War. And while that was really a horrendous war, where the more extreme violence was intracommunal, not like within a community, so that Christian killing was far worse, and Shia killing was far worse than the one across sects. I learned that for people coming out of that civil war, they were talking about how you make assumptions about the laws and government and how things work, taking for granted all of that infrastructure that is built on consent to oblige by the law and to respect the law and to respect the system, right? Once that falters, then it's a jungle. Yet at the same time, because it was a jungle, because no overarching law was dominant and hegemonic, literally everybody could do whatever they wanted. You never knew who had control and what new sets of rules were the next day. So you lived every day truly to the fullest. And in a very ironic way, they actually missed it. They missed how during the Civil War, their life was so much more meaningful and they felt much more alive than during the peace times, right? So I caution against taking too strictly those definitions and temper those definitions by the purpose of why we're using them. So, for example, one of the questions that we were wrestling with, or was part of the title, is why do extremists get all the attention? Why do they get so much attention while the moderates or the peacemakers don't get results? Well, that's because the extremists are their goal is results. They want to achieve something, right? while the peacemakers or the moderates want to be in integrity, right? So there are things moderates are not willing to do. There is nothing extremists are not willing to do. So that gives them an asymmetry automatically, right? The Bolsheviks were a minority, but they were ruthless. And they were very clear about what they wanted. They wanted power, right? Likewise, ISIS, and so on and so forth. So we need to understand that basic element of when you have a core dedicated few who are literally willing to stop at nothing, just like gangsters, right? The more ruthless gangsters are the one that end up on top. So there is that, where the peacemaker is trying to, find a compromise, bridge between two sides, accepting, the existence and the right to self-determination and equality of both sides, while the extremists do not. The extremist does not recognize the humanity of the other. The extremist automatically sees that the other is either less legitimate or is of less worth or is mistaken, right? They just don't get it. And because they are gullible or naive or ill-informed, they are causing us harm. So Rabin's killer continues to think that he did the right thing because he thought Rabin was an idiot and the Israelis who are following are idiots. Even if he was well-meaning and wanted what he thought was good for Israel, he was going to destroy Israel. And therefore killing him was the right thing to do. We cannot afford to wait to explain to him why he's wrong, right? The extremist Islamists have the same logic. So that's one thing about understanding extremism versus moderates. The other is just the nature of human beings who are generally more pain averse than pleasure seeking. So we err to assume threat, we err to assume bad things happening, because when we don't, there is a higher risk of something bad happening. But when we assume good things, we run a greater risk. So a classical example is those Homo sapiens that when they saw the saber-toothed tiger, thought it was a cute cat and wanted to pet it and end up being eaten, right? No longer exist. And those Homo sapiens that saw the saber-toothed tiger and got petrified, either ran away or killed it, we are the progeny of those. So we automatically have a bias towards threat, a bias towards seeing threat than seeing opportunity, right? And that's why it's we accept, for example, that killing is wrong except when it's in self-defense. And if you thought, and the self-defense is you thinking that you were under threat, it's not the objective, let's say, that you were under threat, right? So that bias, like understanding that it's not balanced, that there is this extra work that we need to do to compensate for the fact that human beings are risk averse and want to avoid loss, right? People don't resist change. People resist loss. So if the change you're suggesting is perceived by them as a loss or requiring a loss, they will resist it, right? So the adage that yes, peace is very difficult and very expensive, but war is even worse is part of it. It's like there's this wrong notion that compromise or peace or reconciliation is a negative. It's a less, right? Or that nonviolence is passive when actually it's nothing but active, right? That perception also, the pervasiveness of that perception also muddies people's acceptance or willingness to engage in nonviolence or to engage in compromise, because it is already categorized in that area of getting less. And therefore, the words we use matter. And unfortunately, we need to re-educate a lot of those peacemakers and activists who don't notice that the words they use preempt their ability to send the message. because you already put that person, you've already lost credibility because you just used a word that made the other side feel like you are asking them to lose something, as opposed to, no, I'm asking you to give this in order to give that is much more valuable, right? And finally, again, another thing that we have to contend with as just it is, that if it bleeds, it leads. That there is attraction to sensation. Running the world is very boring, right? War is exciting, right? So the mundane ways in which you run a peaceful society are extremely boring and uninteresting, right? While war, violence, that's why people like action movies and so on, they naturally attract. So again, we need to compensate for how much more appeal and affinity there is. I do not believe it's just a basic instinct of violence, as much as that violence is by definition destroying something and therefore allowing for something new to come. So our attraction to novelty makes us have a bias towards thinking that if we destroy this, we can create something better, right? Incrementalism is not as attractive. It requires patience. It requires faith that everybody else and their cousin are going to collaborate. Like it's not easy. That's why entropy, right? It's easier to destroy things than to build things, to bring things together, right? And it takes faith. So all of these factors work against the faction that's trying to seek peace and seek justice. And finally, I think I used finally several times, but finally the other issue is the attractiveness of simplicity. It's much easier when it's a binary. We are good guys, they are bad guys, right? It doesn't require anything from you. When you have narratives of conspiracy theories, especially in the Arab and the Muslim world, that the West wants to conquer us, they want to do the X, Y, and Z, then I don't need to do anything. The problem is there. We just need to fight them. I just need to be a good Muslim, all right? Or MAGA, right? That it's the immigrants, it's the Democrats, it's someone else. I don't need to change. White America is perfectly fine. We've always been good. We need to go back to how things were because everything was fine until those people came and ruined everything, right? So it doesn't really require anything from you. And that's very tempting. How are we on time? 10 more minutes, 5 minutes?
You got 8 more minutes.
Okay. Now, moving on, there is, going back to the point of purpose, or maybe let's start with agency and conspiracy. So related to the point of this binary of good versus bad versus people do good and people do bad, right? I remember having this argument with again in Lebanon, as a Palestinian who was born and raised in Dubai in the diaspora, and learning all the stories of the massacres and what have you, and the victim of the Palestinians. When I went to Lebanon and learned about the things that the Palestinians did in Lebanon and the massacres that the Palestinians committed in Lebanon, right? That was hard to hear, but like I couldn't deny them, right? And I was arguing with this friend of mine who's a Lebanese Palestinian refugee of Lebanon about certain things that the Palestinians did in the civil war. And she said, no, we are the victims. I told her, yeah, sure, we could be victims, but we can still do wrong things. And I kid you not, she could not comprehend what I just said. For her, it's just inconceivable. They don't juxtapose. If you are a victim, automatically you are good, and automatically the other is bad, right? There is no nuance, there is no complexity. And that, I think, is often not engaged enough. The frustration that we feel, that we hear peacemakers have of, oh my God, they think this, they think that, good, bad. Yeah, well, you need to understand where that's coming from, right? You need to listen to the narrative they have, how they explain the world, but also explain the world in ways that makes them think that they have some semblance of control. We hate uncertainty. We hate not being in control. So we would rather lie to ourselves and tell ourselves that we have control than realize that we do not have control, right? And that's easy to say when I'm 50, much more difficult when you're 16 or 20. So when my cousin, for example, forced his wife to wear the scarf, the hijab, we argued with him like why we argued with his mother because she's our cousin. Like, why did he do that? She said, listen, like, he lives in Birzeit, our village. We have this checkpoint in Birzeit that he can't go anywhere besides the village, right? His wife is the only thing he controls. So he feels like he did something, right? The Christian-Muslim problems that we have in Palestine, a lot of them have to do with, just the threshold. There is nothing we can do with Israel or with the settlers. Okay, so I'll go to the next conflict I have, for which I feel I have some agency, right? And so on and so forth. Again, we can see similar dynamics here in the U.S. with the polarization and projecting onto immigrants, projecting onto women, this toxic masculinity that's so attractive to young men, unfortunately, because of frustrations they're having and feeling that they don't have control over the world. And you have this idiot of Tate who comes and it says, no, there's nothing wrong with you. You should be masculine. You should beat your girlfriend, and so on and so forth. And that makes everything easier for him. It makes you think of yourself that there's nothing wrong with me. It's just those conspiracies outside. And what they don't realize is the codependency in that conspiracy, right? Again, it is just like sugar, like any addiction. It's too tempting to accept the conspiracy because it is clean, it is inherently coherent, and it's clear. Not realizing that when you say that the other is doing all of these things, you're literally saying that they are more powerful than you, and therefore you do not have agency. You rob yourself of your own agency when you say they are this, they are that, they control the world, they control the media. Yeah? You just robbed yourself of any capacity to do anything about it, and that becomes a vicious circle. And of course, that's how extremists, double down on that narrative in order to keep you in that cage. And then also understanding privilege. It's very easy to be a Palestinian American and call for a one state. It's very easy to be an Indonesian and call for a Palestine from the river to the sea, right? And what do we do with the 6 million Jews? Oh, they can convert to Islam, or they live as dhimmi, second-rate citizens, right? And that makes perfect sense to them, right? Or Israelis or Zionists thinking, because that's main for those who don't are not familiar enough with the peace process. One of the main challenges is that at no point did an Israeli negotiator or an elected Israeli official entertain the idea of Palestinian sovereignty. To their credit, all Zionist and Israeli interlocutors and elected officials, not a single one of them, even Rabin, even Peres, entertained Palestinian sovereignty. At most, it was autonomy. And Palestinians are not interested in autonomy. They're interested in their full rights. And when you argue that with some people, I remember I was arguing with this mother whose children were in GW. She said, and what's wrong with autonomy? Right? Not realizing how racist what she said is. I thought, okay, how about Israel gets autonomy and we get sovereignty, right? It's because you are in your pain, because you are where you are and you're petrified of what could happen in the future, it's much easier to continue to have control, you want control over your children, to shelter them and to protect them. The critical, and I'm not exaggerating, apocalyptic problem with Netanyahu and his ilk is that because of they got petrified on October 7th, they see a justification that, no, we cannot contain our enemies. We need to annihilate our enemies, right? So they cannot tolerate even an independent Turkey and an independent Egypt who make their decisions by themselves. They are literally showing that they cannot be partners. Why did they need to bomb Qatar? Like, they could have easily assassinated these guys without, bombing a capital of a Gulf state that has the largest American military base, just to rub it in their faces that even when you have the largest American base, we can still hit you, right? So now you have a situation, even those who want to work with Israel realize that Israel doesn't even accept them as partners. They need to be less than. Israel needs to be hegemonic, otherwise we're not safe. And that, of course, is they're creating enemies rather than creating allies. finally, I want to go back to the point of moderate extremism. Jesus was an extremist, right? That you ask for extreme outlier points sometimes for the good. Civil rights were extremists. The argument that Kennedy wanted the civil rights movement to pace themselves, that they were asking too much, right? Well, that, of course, it's easy for you when you're privileged, right? Similarly, the women's rights movement and the right to suffrage, Frederick Douglass and B. Anthony, right? Is it that, no, we have to wait till everybody has suffrage, or do we give suffrage to the African American men and have women suffer more decades of not having the vote because this at least saves a few African American lives, and so on and so forth. So it is a question of what is your purpose? Are you trying to be fair? Are you trying to be true to your values and stay in integrity? Or are you actually trying to make an actual difference, right? And I would argue, I'm finishing here, I would argue that the 99% of all of those do-gooders fail to see that they're doing the former, not the latter, right? One of the main frustrations that I've had in Palestine, and that's why I left, is that so many people are so invested in being on the right side of history and are perfectly fine, and I would argue even privileged, even in Palestine, that they could afford to say, oh, we were going to boycott Israel, we're not going to talk to Israel. They can afford to say so because they're not directly impacted the way others are. And it's not by chance that some of the most loud peace activists are from Gaza and are from places that got devastated, right? Because they cannot afford, and they're not in the diaspora, right? Because they cannot afford another 600 years until Palestine is liberated. While we here in the US, of course, we can wait another 1,000 years until Palestine is liberated. It doesn't cost me anything to say that. It doesn't cost me anything to wait another 100 years. And that again is, I would invite all of us to always ask, when we're saying moderate, when we're saying extremist, on what basis are we saying that? Is it extreme to ask, I had my relative was a negotiator, and they sent him to talk with ISIS in Syria in the beginning of the war, and literally there was nothing he could offer them. They wanted to kill people. So is it ethical to tell them, okay, you can kill 100 people but not 200? Is it moderate or is he extreme? Right? Again, we need to know what is the purpose, on what basis are we measuring what is extreme and what is moderate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful and powerful. Marc, in the panel discussion back in November, you identified yourself as someone who occupies the middle zone in this conflict. You believe in the middle. Please elaborate on that as you share with us your navigations of the extremes and moderate positions.
Okay. Well, it's great to talk to you, Ari, again. It's Nizar. It's wonderful to meet you. Look forward to more. We're both here in Washington. When I'm online with people, they're usually thousands of miles away, so this is very easy. And it would be great to learn from you. I already learned a lot from you today, that I'm going to take with me. I love the idea. I'm going to get you to question, Ari. I'm not ignoring your question. I love the idea, Nizar, of understanding the need for agency, the need for power by doing what you can within your province, given a very powerless situation. It explains a lot of my own behavior as an American right now. Most of the time I have some agency, I have teaching, I have writing, I have some things that I can at least feel a little bit of agency. But at the same time, on really bad days when we have leaders who are so criminal and they are so dominant of the news cycle and of all of our reactions, and they're so degrading of all of our ethics, that you feel like, "Ah, I got to do something for agency," and I go and I buy a stock. I'm not kidding. I buy a green stock, an ethical investment of $100 in a green company, because at least I could do something to counter the destruction, that I see in front of me. So, and that for me, from my religious perspective, is a good deed. I mean, it's a good, spiritual thing to do. So at least I have that within my power. So the way you described that gentleman with his family, I mean, that's really quite brilliant about why people do what they do in extreme situations. And I am using the word extreme because we're using it too much about a label for people and not enough about situations. Extreme is a good word for situations. It's actually a very inaccurate word when it comes to people. It's I come at this, and Ari knows this. I come at this as a scientist because my science is an act of faith. For my approach to religious traditions, science is, the divine mind in the world. And so when I understand all of these things, I'm also understanding the nature of the challenge to be good in an extreme situation. And politics and the politics of power have always been a kind of very extreme situation that you throw decent people into. And it's since the dawn of humankind. And that kind of facing extremism is what I think is interesting. So when I say, Ari, back then, and then I'll get to my other points, when I say that I'm a person of the middle is not the same as moderate. Many people consider me extremists on one way or another. Maybe many people judge me because the word moderate and extreme is a pejorative label for many people. It's simply a way to label somebody as off the charts. And it's like saying, oh, I love this expression for being a peacemaker for the last 40 years and going over it, is that when the right wing wants to dismiss you, they call you a useful idiot. I love that term. At first I was very insulted, but then I realized that it was a badge of honor. What is useful idiot? It means that this is a traitor, but he's too stupid to understand that he's a traitor, and all of these things that people do. I've been called that in Israel. I've been called that in the United States, in my own synagogue by people at the time. I was doing a lot of work in Syria for 20 years as a Jew and as a rabbi, but getting away from Palestine, Israel. And there were people in my congregation who were working with the Bush administration and considered me a useful idiot for Assad. And that was kind of funny. But the point is, Ari, that the middle is the space to be if you take seriously all of humanity. The middle doesn't mean moderation. The middle means that you believe in engaging with all human beings. The middle means that you're going to take them seriously and that you're going to try to understand them even as you oppose them. And that's a different kind of definition of middle than what people usually think of as moderate. In that capacity, I've sat with people who one generation were considered extremists and the next generation are considered moderate. I paid a very, very heavy price for sitting with Middle Eastern leaders that were considered extremists in the 1980s. And then by the 2000s, they were the moderates, and they were displaced. I mean, Menachem Begin in 1940 is considered an extremist. He blows up a hotel with people in it. 90% of American Jewry considered that extreme and irresponsible and murderous. But by 1979, he becomes the mainstream centrist Israeli prime minister. And then by 1982, he is the moderate opposed by Sharon, who believes in going and conquering all of Lebanon and committing Sabra and Shatila, etc. So everybody becomes extreme or moderate at some point from some perspective. It's really not a useful category. What is a useful category is your principled positions on violence and nonviolence, your principled positions on honesty and dishonesty. So we have a problem when we are peacemakers with it was never a problem for me to meet people who are principled in their violence. It was never a problem for me to sit with people in the PLO or the PFLP or Hamas, as long as they were honest about what their position was. What was a problem is people feigning interest in peace and then funding truly violent people on both sides sometimes in order to make peace impossible. And there are many actors in the Middle East who actively, and the United States, who think in apocalyptic terms, either religiously or even in a corporate sense, of always wanting to end up on top with the money, is that they could be a Gulf family in charge, or they could be somebody sitting in New York. They're apocalyptic in the sense that they want it all. And they will lie about peace, and then it becomes very difficult for us peacemakers to know, are they moderate or not? And so again, the word moderate becomes very unuseful. I have had more honest progress in building relationships with warriors, honest warriors who are part of the PLO and part of the IDF than I've ever had with fake diplomats who say they're for peace, but they're there for money, or they are there for conquest, or they consider the other side contemptible, but they don't say so. And that's exactly what you get when and this is what makes a lot of peacemakers crazy, Israeli peacemakers, Palestinian peacemakers, Arab Israeli peacemakers. It makes you crazy when you think that you're talking to somebody and they're actually interested in peace. And meanwhile, they're funding to guarantee that a two-state solution was impossible. That something like sovereignty, which Nizar wisely raised, that there couldn't be a real sovereignty with safety concerns on both sides met. It wasn't impossible, but there was some dishonesty about equality. Are we talking about two equal peoples or not? And this is something that was a problem for a variety of people who are third parties. I totally agree with Nizar that in my experience with people on the ground, it's not just here, it's Syria, it's Ireland, it's every conflict I've ever been in between, in the in-between space. The people on the ground are the least powerful. And the people outside who are very happy to fight to the last man of the other of their side. So they're safe and they're sitting there thousands of miles away. I even met an English British guy who was in Belfast in the hills in his beautiful home, and he was perfectly happy for the Catholics and Protestants to continue to kill each other down in the Shankill because it didn't affect him and business was good. I met such a person. So who's the extremist here? The ones who are fighting on the Shankill Road, or the one that's profiting from keeping things as the status quo because it's good for business? Who's the extremist? That to me is a pretty extreme moral position. It's much easier for me to understand principled warfare and principled fighting. And in fact, it is a basic human right. If you think that your community is under threat, you have a right to defend yourself. And unfortunately, that's the whole point of negotiations and conflict resolution, where I can already see Nizar as a terrific trainer in negotiation, is that it's the perfect right of people on both sides if they see and if they feel that their family is threatened. And unfortunately, and this is where Ari talked wisely about the algorithm and about keeping, the profits to be made by keeping things unresolved and hateful, is that many people are led to believe that the only answer is to conquer and kill them all or get rid of them because of the selective information they've been given, that it's not possible, that there's no solution possible, there's no future possible with them. I mean, it's pretty amazing, and this I'm just going to say as a partisan for a moment. It's pretty astonishing to me that, and I'm speaking strictly as a Jewish peacemaker with deep connections in Israel, that it can drive us insane that you could spend 30, 40 years as a prime minister making sure that there's no peace partner by fully funding Hamas and humiliating the PLO for year after year after year and ensuring that they're corrupt by the way in which you govern, and then cry out loud on October 7th. Because really, that is a way to ensure that there's no peace partner, to make not only Hamas, but the most violent person ever to lead Hamas, which was Sinwar, who didn't even tell the people in Qatar that his plan was as diabolical and as murderous and ultra-violent as it was. Even they didn't know. So this is an astonishing kind of reality of how of deception and manipulation that makes people think that the other side is only extreme, but they are actually being given a very selective piece of information on what exactly has happened, what were the possibilities before, what is the reality now. All of that was not part of their information system. And so one of our tasks is to try to find a way, and this is my bias to my methodology of conflict healing, compassionate reasoning, is that the more that we build relationships across enemy lines, and the more that the proxy warriors, which is us in America, for example, the more that we build relationships and exchange complicated information that is neither black nor white, that has good and evil on all sides, that the more we exchange that, we figure out how to push back on those who don't want us to live in peace together. It's the same in the American economy. It's the same in the American government now. There are people who don't want us to live together, but there are many of us who are lost in the middle who do. But we need to build relationships. We don't have them enough. But history suggests from Northern Ireland all the way to Vietnam and the United States, the more human relationships there are that build in a deep space of trust, not because they're both moderates, but because they both honestly talk about the rights and wrongs and they exchange information on the facts that they have before them, the more that history suggests that peace and justice eventually come. You know, you don't give up on the United Nations because the League of Nations was a catastrophe. You don't give up on two-state solution because the efforts so far were catastrophic and manipulated out of possibility. You keep building because this usually takes generations, especially when there's so much invested in keeping this going. There is violent Christianity, evangelical Christianity that wants an apocalypse. There is violent Judaism that wants an apocalypse, and there is some violent Islam that wants an apocalypse. But they're not the majority. Because we don't build a deeper relationship, they become dominant. They become dominant of the algorithm. They become dominant of the politics. They have clarity. The Soviets, as you said, the Bolsheviks were not the majority. But the Bolsheviks got power and destroyed Russia for over 100 years now. So this is where it's not the numbers, it's relationships and building solidarity to be convicted of new solutions and new ways. I still believe that's possible here. There may be nothing left but a one state by the end of this. There will be a lot of bloodshed, but I still believe that relationships across Jewish, Christian, Muslim lines, relationships across Israeli, Palestinian, Gazan, all of this, these relationships in the age of online communications, this is what we need in order to overcome fascism, in order to overcome, hatred as a philosophy that we have in the dark side of all of our cultures, but it is not the dominant feature. It is just a feature that because of, I do a lot of work on neuroscience now, on the neuroscience of violence and fear. It's very, very easy to make people terrified and conspiratorial and to not see a rational way out. And we have to work at that. And we have successfully many times in history, but this conflict has eluded us. It has eluded us. And that's where I think the building relationships, especially with women, especially with people who are not wealthy, especially with people who are religious. You cannot make a peace process that excludes religious people. You just have to find the ones that want to stop killing. And I know them on all sides. There are, and just forget the label moderate.
Right.
Doesn't matter at all. So that's about 20 minutes,
Great.
and I'll stop there.
Well, we're going to open it up in a second to, and folks should raise their hand, that use the raise hands function, and Daniel and I will try to identify folks. But as I posed to Marc, just an outtake from statements you've made earlier, I'd like for you, Nizar, to build on something that in the chat, Davida Wood has come up with something that we in the theater talk about a lot too. A better use of the term moderate would be to suggest that someone deploy radical empathy. Now, it seems to me that you yourself are a practitioner of radical empathy, and I thought of that when you spoke about Palestinians and Israelis sharing a common goal, which is the need to be safe. The baggage that Israelis carry is they need to be the majority in order to feel safe, because historically, when they haven't been a majority, they've been persecuted. They weren't, you referenced a Gazan peace builder who spoke of Martin Luther King. And this Gazan peace builder says, for me to end the occupation, I need to end the Israelis' fear of me. They're occupying me because they think I'm going to kill them. So I need to make the Israelis less afraid of me in order for me to achieve my goal. Can you speak about radical empathy? And then what you've experienced is the resistance to radical empathy, the person who does not want to empathize with the Zionist. We have this comment in the chat that the Zionist is the extremist position. How do you counsel bringing empathy to a position of which you're very critical?
Definitely. Actually, that's a very good question. So, and I'll start with one of the more famous negotiations expert, Vince Strauss. He was a hostage negotiator, an FBI hostage negotiator. And he says, I don't understand why people think empathy is weakness. So on the contrary, it's extremely powerful. When you're empathizing with the hostage taker, you're trying to understand where they're coming from, what mobilizes them, what moves them in order to de-escalate the situation, right? You're not agreeing with them, right? When you're talking to a terrorist, you're not agreeing with them. You're trying to understand what is it exactly that they're trying to achieve? What do they think? Why do they think what they're doing is going to achieve what they think they want, right? So radical empathy is just the basics of negotiations, which is if you don't have good data, your negotiation is only as good as the data you have. Garbage in, garbage out. So the thing that you know least about is the other, right? So it's in my interest to know as much as possible about how they see things. I don't need to agree with them. I just need to understand. And that's why people like, Holbrook, what's his name, Lahdar al-Ibrahimi, the Algerian, were very good mediators because they actually did not judge, or they didn't show their judgment and genuinely listened to what makes the other side tick. So what Abu Temi, the Gazan pacifist, was saying is because he wants this to end and he wants freedom, He was going for the root. He didn't want to stop at the symptom. The symptom is the occupation. Hamas is a symptom of the occupation. It's not the problem. Hamas exists because too many people think that that's the only way to get rid of the occupation, right? The second, Palestinians have their full rights. Hamas doesn't have a raison d'etre, right? So part of the frustration, which is also part of what's mistaken in the majority of pro-Palestine advocacy, is that they don't see that. They conflate the symptom to the root, and they don't differentiate that when pro-Israel or pro-Zionist arguments are being thrown at them, right? They feel the need to defend Hamas, right? No, you don't need to defend Hamas, right? Yes, of course you have. Everybody has the right to self-determination and to self-defense. That's not the issue. The issue is how do we get to a point where the result is freedom and safety and full rights and human rights for everyone, right? The realization of radical empathy is that just the mere mathematical statistical probability that you're going to get what you want is way higher when the other side helps you get what you want, right?
Very good.
So it is relational, right? I'm actually, when I teach negotiations, I'm cautious about using the word compromise. I invite people, rather than thinking of compromise, which is splitting the difference, to think, is there a way where you and I can come up with a third solution that we come out of negotiations surprised that we got more than what we even expected was even possible, right? That attitude of abundance, right? So rather than coming from a place of scarcity, okay, I need to give this, I need to compromise, I'm not going to get everything, 20% of something is better than 100% of nothing, is there a way where I can make it a multiplier and realize that I can do that when I pool my resources, my networks, and my experience with your network, with your experience, and there's a higher probability when we put our heads together to tackle a problem, we statistically have a higher probability of coming up with a solution that emerges that achieves more of what both of us want, right? Just because we have more information, right? So when the approach in radical empathy is, so I want to just be careful because I do not want to romanticize or even infantilize this idea of peaceniks and tree huggers, right? It's actually extremely selfish and not altruistic. You're not doing this because you want to be a good guy. You're doing this because you actually get more, right? Out of very selfish reasons, I am realizing that just like the parable of the sun and the wind, trying to get a person to take off their coat. The wind and the sun are competing. So the wind keeps blowing, and the guy holds his coat stronger and stronger the more the wind blows. But when the sun shines, the person takes off the coat, right? That rather than forcing the other side to do what I want them to do, is there a way in which I make them want what I want them to want?
I see.
That's the thing, is that sure, I mean, the US can bomb Iran. Sure, you can do that. You can force people. But is it as sustainable as, let's say, the EU, where after hundreds of years of Europeans killing each other, realizing, you know what? Maybe we get more of what all of us want if we work together, right?
So we've got hands raised. While Walter was first, Barbara, we haven't heard from a woman yet. We've heard 3 men in a row. Let's hear from you first, and then Walter will bring you.
Okay, thank you. It was said here that that one of the impediments seems to the peace process seems to be that that Jews, or many Jews, feel historically that they've been historically persecuted when not in the majority, and so so the question I have is, how can you really I mean, there's no guarantees, of course, in life, but when we look at reality here, well, everybody has a different view of reality, I suppose, but you know, the the Jews in, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, in every Muslim majority country, you know, have been kicked out, deported, killed. And it's not as if Hitler didn't kill 6 million also. So I'm not just blaming Muslim majority countries, but we're talking about Palestine now. And so um, I don't see how Jews could have anything but a fear when that's been, and it's not just a historical reality, it's the reality now. And it's not just Jews. And again, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but the Palestinian, I mean, I realize they don't have, anything near complete control of themselves, but in Palestinian society in Gaza and the West Bank and in Muslim majority countries, there are very few religious rights for anyone except certain brands of Islam. That applies to Christians. It applies to, and gays and lesbians, not just persecuted or killed. Women have very, very few rights. So to me, it seems intractable to have like a kumbaya. I mean, I think there should be peace. They shouldn't be killing each other, but to have like a one state solution, I don't see how that could ever happen because by the numbers, Jews will be in the minority, and I just think it's inevitable that they will have no rights and they will be killed or deported.
We're going to hold on to that question comment and go to Walter, and then Marc will have a chance to hear from you on this. Walter.
Thanks so much, Ari. So I have recently, I'm in the process of writing something now that I am coming out of the closet and saying that I'm no longer a Zionist, but a post-Zionist. Not an anti-Zionist, but a post-Zionist. I can go into, I don't want to take up the whole period on that. But why have I come to that exception? It relates very much to the whole issue of the so-called moderates. And I'm talking now about the Israeli Jewish camp. So when I was living in Israel in the late 70s, there were many dear friends of mine who said, in a sense, who were like members of Peace Now and other such groups, if it wasn't for those stupid settlers, everything would be fine. That the problem is the Datiim, the religious, and the settlers and so forth. But the fact is that if you look at the thing over 50 odd years, or 57 years, I think, since 1967 or whatever it brought you, or almost to it, that you see that once Israel takes the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem in 1967, there's basically a straight line. They end up building hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of places, settlements, not hundreds of thousands of people living in hundreds of settlements. And it's kind of a straight line. I mean, even during Oslo, they continued to do it. And further, I think this was enabled by our community, the American Jewish community, the mainstream American Jewish organizations. There were many of us who were unhappy. We fetched a bit, we wrote articles, but that's the kind of what happened. So that's why I'm raising this partly because of this term moderate, and I think you may have referred to this, Ari, in what you said earlier. It seems like that ultimately Zionism was about a Jewish state in the whole land of Israel. I think that's where it started with Herzl, and that's where we are 130 or 40 years later. But we're also in a situation where we're in perpetual conflict. So were we really moderate is, I guess, the question. And did the moderates were they really moderates, or did they kind of go along with what happened?
Well, that's great, Walter. And we look forward to your further writing on the subject. Marc,
Thank you.
Maybe we can also fold, as you contemplate both Barbara's questions about an entity where Jews can practice their religion without fear, if it were to be anything other than an Israeli state, a sovereign state as exists, and considering Walter's question and his presentation of a post-Zionist label. Let's also bring in Anne's comment that got us started in the chat, which is that Zionism is extreme. Equating Zionist genocidal Israel with Palestine and calling it a conflict is an extreme proclamation. Nothing sounds moderate here. When you stand with justice, moderates might actually start talking to you. The group sounds one-sided and extreme. Um, Speak to all of those comments as it applies to Zionism and where you put it on the spectrum of, and of course, there's so many different kinds of Zionism, but on the spectrum of moderate to extreme.
Um, Let me ask, when are we going till?
We're going to go here till we have another 10 minutes and until we go to breakout.
Oh, there's going to be a breakout. I forgot about
Yeah,
that.
we're going to have a half hour of breakouts.
Okay, so the Alan Levitt and others there'll be time for them to ask their question as well.
Maybe you'll talk for a few minutes and we'll get to Alan and Levitt, Alan again. So
Okay.
don't go too long right now.
I think it's Marilyn that's sitting there.
Great.
Okay, so yeah, I'll try not to go too long, but these are very involved questions. I really appreciate the honesty of the questions and what I think it was Barbara who had raised about the Jewish. Who was that? Was it
That was Barbara Sosnick. Yes.
Barbara? Yeah, yeah. So I appreciate all of this, and again, so I resist anti-Zionist, Zionist, and post-Zionist. I have met very, very strong Zionists who are the most courageous peacemakers I've ever met, and I've met non-Zionists who are just interested in their business succeeding in Tel Aviv. There's so many self-identifications here that really it's just like the problem with who's a moderate and who's an extremist. If you get into this business and you look at labels, you can't move from the spot. But if you get in, what are your interests? And Nizar understands this very well. What are your interests? What are your values? What are your non-negotiables? Then you start to see the complexity. There's no way to get around the fact that, and this is something I often hear when people talk about Jews, is that from a Christian and Muslim perspective, Judaism is a faith. Well, I'm sorry, it's not a faith for millions of Jewish people, especially the ones who moved to Israel. It's an ethnic identity the same way as a Kurdish identity or a Druze identity. Kurds want their own state. It happens to be part of three other states. It's probably never going to happen in our lifetime because of the inherent threat to the sovereignty issues of Turkey and Iraq and Syria, etc. And so there are millions of Jews in Israel who don't consider it a religion. It's considered to be a people that have no majority status anywhere else in the world. And they're going to give their lives rather than see them become a minority again here. This is a repair of 2,000 years of bad history as far as they are concerned, for all the reasons that Barbara mentioned. Other people, it is a system of religion and practice who are non-Zionist in Israel who look like the ultra-Zionists. They have black clothing and they're non-Zionists and they're there as faithful people. They're not going anywhere either. So the real question is, how do you make peace? And how do you have an entity that can coexist with all of these different self-identifications? I started to notice that a lot of people that I were very religious Muslims started saying they were Muslims and didn't mention that they were Palestinians because at a certain point they gave up hope in the national constructs and gave more hope to the Khalifa or to the transformation of history. And these are pretty, nonviolent mainstream people coming out of Hebron and other places. So we can't tell everybody what their identity is. All we can do is figure out political and military and legal and ethical constructs of equality and sovereignty and safety. And I think it's possible. The Israeli, Palestinian, and Jewish people I know are working, for example, on a two states, one land concept. They're working on it being two sovereign entities occupying the same piece of land. And that way, no one ends up being a minority. It's very interesting concepts, okay? And it would take a much more, for lack of a better word, working class, down to earth process than the Oslo process, which was dominated by wealthy people. It's still dominated by wealthy people. It's just the wealthy people now dominating are completely corrupt and want to make a gazillion dollars on stolen property in Gaza. But even the Oslo process was really too elitist to think about what does every working class people want here. And we, as outsiders who are non-Israeli and non-Palestinian, we also have to respectfully say it's not what I want in the world. It's what they want.
Right.
And that is something that has to be negotiated with every different kind of constituency in Palestine and Israel. The Jerusalemite Palestinians, the Haifa Palestinians, the West Bank, the Gazans, and not us. And then on the Jewish side, it has to be the ultra Orthodox and the serious national Zionists. Even, and I know some that want to be at the table. They are overwhelmed by a very manipulative 30, 40 years of a prime minister with a very dark heart and who's very, very good, just like our current president, with manipulating people into their worst. But I know strong nationalist Zionists who have risked their lives for a real solution and have good friendships on the Palestinian side. They're overshadowed by the news and by the extremes, by the violent ones. But I'm telling you, they exist. We just don't have a formula yet for how to empower that kind of international discussion that would really lead to all the safety concerns on both sides that are legitimate.
Let's take,
so that's all I'll say about it.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's take Marilyn, and then I see Kay, you have your hand up, and then we'll have to go to breakouts once we get these questions on the table. And then we'll come back. There's many excellent points in the chat right now about youth programs for Palestinian and working class Israelis. We'll talk about that in the plenary as we come back at 5 o'clock. But Marilyn and Alan, you next.
Jonathan.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think, I guess it was Dan that made the title of this about the extremists and moderates. There's another group that I think may be bigger than all them, and that's just the silent group, the silent majority of people in this country that do not understand some of the nuances, that they look at things as a monolith, that all Palestinians are like Hamas and all Jews are like the West Bank settlers. And I think that I think one of the things that's very important is to have these kinds of dialogues. I mentioned this before, I room with graduate school with a Palestinian diplomat. My son lives in Qatar. He lived in Abu Dhabi. When you get to know people as people and you have the sense of humor or have dialogues or have the same sense of family, there's a greater understanding and a greater ability to at least listen to other points of view. I think that's what JIDS does, and it's a matter of how can we exponentially increase JIDS all over the country.
Yes, you said it. Beautiful. Kay, how about you?
Yeah, what I'm going to say is going to be probably a little more controversial. Although first, I want to say I very much appreciate what Alan just said. As someone who had a Palestinian roommate when I was a young 20-something in New York. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment for a couple of years in Manhattan, and our families have remained friends ever since. And so that does really make a difference. I guess the more controversial question that I want to ask is the other day, I'm involved in another group that that has discussions over the red-blue divide. It's called Braver Angels. Many of you may be familiar with it. And they had a debate on ICE. Should ICE be abolished? And the conversation kind of went, a lot of people agreed ICE was doing bad things, but it could be, some said it could be reformed. Others said it had gone so far over the cliff in the things that it's doing that it has no credibility and it should just be abolished. And so the controversial question I'm proposing is Zionism like that? I understand that there are all kinds of people between the river and the sea. I understand, as a Jew, of course, I grew up with the concept that Jews, Israel is a land where Jews can be in the majority, and that is what keeps them safe. I'm not so sure of that anymore. And has Zionism kind of, because as someone commented, there were many different kinds of Zionism put forward, at the turn of the 18th into the 19th century. And the Zionism of Yudah Magnus and Ahad Ha'am and so on. But now, and then the Zionism that was implemented was the Zionism of Ben Gurion, and now we have, the Zionism of Smotrich and the like. So I'm just throwing that question out there. Can Zionism be reformed so that everyone between the river and the sea can live with something that has Jews in the majority somewhere? Or has that just gone so far off the deep end as to not be viable anymore?
Well,
Ari,
yeah.
Can I also include May Rahman's statement, or you want to read it, or however? I do want to go into a small group to the breakouts now.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I wanted, Nizar to have a chance to respond to bring his radical empathy to the question of Zionism, but we can also wait on that too. Let's read in my Abdul Rahman, who wrote to Dan. She's not able to be here because of preparations for an iftar benefit coming up. But she wrote, in case I'm unable to join the Zoom call, I do want to say, I detest the assumption that anyone other than the Palestinians living under Israel's brutality assume the right to lecture or modify Palestinians' decisions or behaviors towards their occupiers. Palestinians' right to self-determination is non-negotiable, period, and their right cannot be modified or crafted by anyone other than Palestinians who have patiently endured Israel's brutal and genocidal policies. I mean, I think she's also talking about monitoring expression and monitoring tone. If the extremist is defined by the vehemence or the anger that has been experienced by those who've suffered the most, how dare someone try to control that tone? Dan, let's hear from Nizar quickly about, in response both to Mai's piece and to what Kay is presenting, just to hear him process, and then you can divide people up into the breakout sessions and tell us what we're going to do. You've got 5 questions, and I'll let you read those questions to folks, unless you want me to. But let's hear from Nizar first.
Sure, thank you. I mean, each of these could take a session, but I would start that, of course, there are different kinds of Zionism. Um, to the extent that Zionism is the right of Jewish people to self-determination, sure, nobody disagrees with that. I agree with Marc. It's self-identification. My thinking, whether they are an ethnic group or a religious group, is really not relevant. Kurds believe that they are Kurds. Jews believe that they are Israelis, right? And Palestinians believe that they are Palestinians, right? Like most Zionists believe that the Palestinians are not a people, right? I negotiated with a person who genuinely believed that there is no such thing as Palestinians. So what matters is what the peoplehood is, what people think is their peoplehood, right? The problem is when Zionism is the right of Jews to self-determination, even if it's at the expense of others. That's the problem, right? So until today, all the versions of Zionism that were applied, it's the right of safety and the feeling of safety of Israelis and Jewish Israelis was superior to literally all other rights. So killing 1,000 Palestinians in order for a Jew to feel safe is legitimate under that definition of Zionism, because it's either that or the Holocaust. So that false dichotomy that is propagated, whether intentionally or not intentionally, because Zionists believe that they are the victims, right? That's where the problem becomes, is that it's coming at the right of others, which is something I argue with my Palestinian friends, is that we know that we have a right to self-determination. Are we going to do what the Zionists did in the 1930s and 40s, which is exercise our right of self-determination at the expense of the Jewish Israelis? Because they're not going back to Poland. They have nothing left in Poland for them. They're not Polish, right? They've already mixed East and West, right? So there's that ethical question of course it's easy to get rid of all of the Jews. Sure, but is it the right thing to do, right? Wouldn't we be doing to them what they did to us, right? So there's that. On the issue of Muslim, and similarly, Islam is, for one person, is different than Islam for the other. So of course there are good Muslims and bad Muslims. There are good Jews and bad Jews. But also historically, and to Barbara's question, there's a lot of evidence of how whenever Jews were persecuted, they came to Muslim countries because Islam happens to be a religion that gives rights to Jews and Christians in ways that Christians didn't give rights to Jews. So from Spain and Istanbul and Ottoman period, even in the 1929 massacre in Hebron, there were Palestinians who massacred Jews, and there were Palestinians that hid Jews to protect them from Palestinians, right? And the former Speaker of the House, Berg, I can't remember, Avram Borg, his family was from those Hebronites who were protected by Muslims. So there is that too. The question is, what narrative, what explanation do people have? Because yes, of course, since the creation of Israel, there has been a very easy narrative of saying, oh, well, Zionist Jews do this because their religion tells them so, right? Because it's easier to say, oh, well, it's the problem is their religion. If we get rid of them, we won't have a problem, right? So all of these explanations were not there 200 years ago, for example, right? The same Quranic texts that were interpreted differently 200 years ago are now interpreted with the backdrop of Israel's behavior. So the increase in anti-Semitism is not coming because of Islam being anti-Semitic, right? But because texts and explanations, religious explanations, were expedient and simple to the majority of people. And finally, the final thing I want to say, you cannot underestimate the fact that Arab and Muslim nations continue to suffer the inferiority complex of colonialism, right? They still have not gotten out of that because they experience the West as oppressive, whether militarily, whether economically, or culturally, right? That takes a whole other session, but understanding this East-West rivalry, the Crusades, colonialism, and vice versa, how Europe and the West was always afraid of Islam and the Crescent and what have you, right? So all of these, in order to understand why somebody believes X, you need to understand what is the underpinnings of their thinking.
Right. All right, Dan, I think we are ready for
Oh,
breakouts now.
Okay, let me
that's a big mistake.
share my screen. Hopefully you all, see, I can scroll down. You all can get a snapshot of this. We're not going to be able to get to all the questions, but hopefully each group can address at least some of the questions. And I think this may have also been put on your chats. So I'm going to stop it now. And
So we're going
pause.
to come an idea.
Is being
I'm sure there were 10 different groups in the middle of saying something very important. And maybe we group to sort of summarize quickly what was going on and to say that final statement. Dan, does that sound like a good use of the time?
Sure.
So, Dan, maybe you can help identify who was in each. Do you have a list of who was in each group, or how
I do
many
not.
groups? How many groups were there? Do we know?
I think there were like 13 groups.
Oh boy! All right. Well, that's a
So
lot.
I think people should just raise their hand
Very good.
and volunteer if they want to make a statement or some of a summary nature otherwise.
Let's make sure we have a gender balance of who's raising hands, please. But let's start with Gary. You got 1 minute. And unmute yourself. We won't count the seconds against you. Good.
Evelyn and Tom Goldring and I had a great conversation, but don't want to bring it up here. I just wanted to bring up the answer that I've seen to question number 4. That is, and I forgot the words of, what can we do about all this stuff? Because that was what sort of inspired me, is thinking about what they were saying. To me, as a member of J Street, there's an event coming up this week where all of the people you've been talking about, the peacemakers, the standing together, is going to be there. The people who talk about making the extremists into moderates, moderates into extremists. Ehud Olmert's going to be there. If you want to know, the facts about things like genocide, Philippe Sands, who many of you haven't heard of, who knows more about genocide than anyone on earth, he is going to be there and have time. And you'll have all sorts of people. I just want to let people know this is one thing you can do. Another thing that we are really focusing on in Jamaat that we hope people will do is go to other iftars. We're trying to find, all the different iftars we can go to. We just got business cards. We're going to be talking to people as much as we can. And it's a very arduous process of having this fabulous meal and doing it at the same time. So it's really the most easy, fun thing to do this stuff that we think we ought to do.
That's a fabulous idea. Great. Thank you. Who's next? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Mindy, I see you're raising your hand. So unmute yourself and let's go. Mindy, unmute yourself.
okay. Just to pull out, we had a very interesting group. We were Troika. And the 2 points I want to raise is finding a chance to get people to understand more deeply, go beyond understanding, feel the different worlds. One of them would be to have the Quran more visible in public places. I was at a hospital, the chapel had a Quran there, along with a Christian New Testament and the Old Testament. That's worthwhile. And finding ways to share readings with people from those traditions and not. The other idea I come out with is enable people to understand the spectrum of organizations within the Palestinian community, within the Jewish community, whether it's Jewish American, Palestinian American. They have a lot of influence. They have different voices. They have different political potency. We need to understand the wealth of interests and voices in the respective communities. So that's what I have to say.
That's great. Thank you. Charles.
Over the last year or two, geotrees.com, I'm the editor of geotrees.com, has been moving away from sending out massive piles of email to using the open message forum. I have just put the link to that forum on the chat, and it is a place where anyone can go without subscription, membership, profiles, etc., to read people's comments and information and to post their own. So I want to make it available to this group where you can put something there and not have be burying people alive under your emails. And the whole idea is to make a space available that people can use without swamping half the continent with emails. I mean, all of us, I know I'm going crazy with the email traffic, and I'd like to get my life back. And I guess I'm being very selfish now. This is a way of doing it. It's just saying, here's the forum. If you want to put something there, just send it in and we'll see what happens. And the link is right there in the chat at this time. That's it. Thank you.
I'm so glad you identified yourself. I've been getting I had no idea what it was or who was creating it, and now I do. So thank you for your work. Andra, we want to come to you, and Jim will come to you, but Brett and Emily, you're on notice. We want to hear from you too. So, Andra, do you want to share something?
Okay, I'll try to do it. I'm not good with my memory, to be honest with you. But one of the concepts we found most interesting was the concept that Marc shared about being a moderate. The concept was holding two different perspectives at the same time. And that requires compassion for the circumstances that each people is going through. It was interesting because we had Mohammed from Pakistan, Kamal from India, also to give perspectives. And Kamal had mentioned that it was very interesting for him to see his country of India have the Indians leave India to actually go into the Gazan area to be able to be possible to do the construction and the building. And he foresaw the possibility that the Indians and the Jews will get together, they'll marry, they'll have children, and all of a sudden the cultures are mixed together. So he sort of had a positive perspective, but that was an unusual take from what we're really reading. And of course, we talked about the confusion because there is certainly a confusion that many people have about Judaism being a religion and Israel being Jewish. And why would they do what they do to the Palestinians? And so we talked about not confusing the religion of Judaism, which is responsible for having the Hebrew of Tikkun Olam, which means the healing of the world, confused with what the Israeli government has been doing.
Thank you. Great.
One other thing. We also talked about mentioned the New Story leadership coming up actually with the Phoenix Plan. So these young people are coming up with a peace plan when sometimes the adults, cannot. And then, of course, in terms of what you can do about it, May Abdul Rahman, who you read the quote with, she founded an organization called Americans for Palestinian Orphans. And I know sometimes people have their own way of trying to contribute to do something because we feel helpless sometimes. Sometimes this is a way that we can help because there probably at this point maybe 70,000 orphans because of Gaza. And so you can help the children, and hopefully the children will grow up to be the peacemakers for the future. So Americans for Palestinian Orphans, please remember that.
Right. And we'll put that in the chat. Or Dan, you've got my email that alludes to that. Jim, Dan, and Charles, we're coming back to you for a follow-up, and then others too. So Jim Vitarella.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. And particularly thank you, Marc and Nizar, for your presentations. But Nizar, I've got to admit that I was quite surprised and disappointed that you never mentioned the word Hamas. You never mentioned October 7th. You never mentioned the fact that this maniac Sinwar launched this horrible attack without consulting, as Marc pointed out, with his political leaders in Qatar, probably because he knew they would tell him he was crazy. And in the transcript that I read in the Washington Post that was intercepted by intelligence, his own people questioned him when they were planning it. And he said, don't you realize, Sinwar, that Israel's going to obliterate us if we do this? And his answer was, believe it or not, and this is not a quote, but he basically said, I don't give a damn. The Palestinian people in Gaza need to accept this and suffer accordingly. That's in effect what he said. And I honestly don't understand, Nizar, and I love you, man. I know your mother's Italian, I'm Italian, I think you're a great guy, but why did you avoid this important issue about Hamas and what they did on October 7th?
Well, Nizar, I'm sure you have a response, so let's give you the floor for that.
Sure. I mean, for the same reason that World War II didn't happen because of Hitler.
Look, I'm a very blunt guy, okay?
No.
People like Andrea know me.
It's an important question. I actually did mention Hamas and Sinwar, but that's not the issue. The issue is, again, they are a symptom, right? We can blame Hamas, we can blame Sinwar, right? That we can condemn them too, but that doesn't make any difference. They are a symptom of a situation. The people who support Hamas, right, are people who believe that the situation is so bad, there is no way around it, right? We're gonna get killed. Before October 7th, a lot of Palestinians, when people were interviewing them about when they were going to the fence and protesting the right of return, right, for 3 years, people were telling them, aren't you scared that you'll be killed? And they said, we're dying anyways. We're gonna get killed anyways. We might as well get killed doing something, right? So after 15 years of being under siege and 7 wars, the attitude of people in Gaza has been one where it is already apocalyptic. You might as well do something drastic so that you derail the whole system, right? It's a bit like the Bolsheviks things, sure, but calling Sinwar crazy, whether he is or not, is not helpful. Is not gonna help us understand why these things happen. Because if we ever put everybody into, have perfect mental health institutions, that's not gonna solve the problem. The problem is an actual structural situation where some people have power and have privileges and other people do not, and the value of life is desperate, right? So when an Israeli Jew gets killed, the whole world moves. When 1,000 Palestinians get killed, there is a lot of mourning, what have you, but nothing actually changes. That's been the experience. So the math is we need more Palestinians to die for the world to move. And it's unfortunate, of course, I disagree with it. But that narrative, you want to think, what does the situation need to be in Gaza for people to think that narrative makes sense? And that's where I come from.
All right, we're going to do Dan and then Andrea and Barbara. Charles is not raising his hand anymore, and then Emily and Brett.
So there were a lot of fascinating statements that we all heard today. Among them, Marc's comments about how Oslo was basically the elites running the show, and we need the working class to run the movement if we want it to be effective. But I look at that and I'm thinking that sounds great in theory to have, the working class, the people, the masses, the multitude do this. But how are they going to do it when people are saying, if you don't agree with me, I won't talk to you? And obviously, as someone who is the president of a dialogue society, that's been a thorn in my side for some time. It got a lot worse on October 7th. But I think that's one of the basic problems right now. I know there are a lot of problems that are basic. People are talking about all the destruction on the land, and I don't want to minimize that. But at least here, when we're all safe, why can't we talk to each other here? And there seems to be this attitude that, the next technique, the next device is ostracize and exclude those who don't agree with us. And I'm seeing it on both sides. So maybe that's my working definition of extremist, except it's unfortunately very common.
Well,
and we need to change that attitude, I think, or I don't know how we're going to get together.
Well, this dialogue society that you've helped put together, and we just saw in real time, May express her critique of what The formulation of the event was today, fully heard, and Andra pick up Mai's cause. We all listened, we all absorbed, and now we all know what to do to honor Mai's advocacy for Palestinian orphans. So I think the job well done in the worst of situations. Andrea and then Barbara.
So first I want to say we had a great group. We had Phil and Zafar and Orit, and I'll just say two comments about them and then, my own perspective. So we heard Zafar, who was talking a lot about humanity and a common humanity. And his concern was also when we have extremists in whether they're Muslims or Christians or Jews, that we should not stereotype a particular culture, a particular religion. And he kept trying to talk about common humanity. That was really important to him. He's a new person in JIDS, so this is one of the first time or one of the first times that he's come to one of these dialogues. We had Orit, who's mostly bothered by people yelling at demonstrations, at protests. And we try to approach people and have a discussion with them, and they did not want to sit down with her. She's a therapist, so she likes to have discussions. And then we had Phil, who he used to work for USAID. I don't know if he call himself a moderate Christian, a compassionate Christian, but he gave us a little bit of a religious perspective. What I said is I like to think of myself as a pragmatist. Sometimes, for example, I'll give two examples. Right now, if I was I don't know what, I'm going to be going to law advocacy for J Street. I'm not sure what they're going to tell us, but if it was up to me, and we're talking about what's happening in the West Bank, I would talk about two things: settler violence, and Israel has a campaign to try to register land in Area C of the West Bank, which is about 60% of the West Bank. They want to turn it into state land, and then they want to hand it over to settlers. Those sound like, small, not kind of incremental issues, not talking about two states. That's what I would work on. Does that make me a moderate? I don't know. I think of it as pragmatic. That's where we are. That's what we need to do. Sometimes I might take a position that sounds more extreme, other times more, progressive, but I like to think about pragmatic solutions of what we can get done. And I'll just say very quickly, in the American context, I think that the most important thing is to defeat Trumpism. I happen to think we have to elect moderate Democrats. Other people might not agree with that. But
I can't get this back.
Thank you. Barbara, I want to hold off on you for a second since you've spoken once. We haven't heard from Ashraf or Najla yet. So let's hear from them first. Ashraf Sufi, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we, in our group only, we were two. I think Eva was there with me, and I appreciate. And basically, seems like both of us were on the moderate side, that both Israel and Palestinians should work together to get to two-state solution. She also raised the very good saying from Torah, which also Quran admits, is that you should love your neighbor. And she mentioned about that the settlers are not loving their neighbors. Instead of that, they are really destroying them. And I think she was in favor of that. And I also raised the point of some of the Muslim countries are really not treating the minorities right. But we, in our own way, whichever way we could do, we should try to mend that, tell those governments to please do just respect your minorities. And both the religion says that you should be treating your neighbors right and should be empathetic towards each other. And lastly, I said about, and we both agreed on that the problem is just like one of the speakers said, that the some people do it for their advantage, and at this time we felt that like Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu is doing for its own benefit so that he can avoid corrupt charges, and that's why he's prolonging this thing. And the same way we thought, and I like Nizar's point of view that Hamas is a product rather than a cause for everything, whatever has been done in the past. And Eva can respond to anything which I said didn't mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Najla Darubi, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to repeat what we had, the discussions that we had, because Mindy actually spoke already for our group. But for you, Dan, my recommendation is to have more time for us to speak to each other and get to know each other, because that's the only way that we're going to understand each other and change our minds, rather than we ended up with a good discussion today, but it was very intellectual. I mean, what was your goal of today? What was the goal of today? For people who have different views to talk to each other, or was it to define what is an extremist and what is a moderate? This is where we ended up at.
So
if you wanted us to hear each other, then we didn't have enough time. I'm sorry.
So to speak to that, next Sunday night, and I know J Street's going on at the same time. Next Sunday night, we have an iftar. We're doing it with the Rumi Forum, and it's going to be near the friend's house near DuPont Circle. Please come to that. Every Labor Day weekend on a Sunday, we have like an all afternoon and evening party. So there's no work the next day. It's Labor Day. And you and I should talk about whether we need to do more events like that. I thoroughly agree with you.
Dan, do you make the email? Do you have a contact sheet that you distribute so that people who've enjoyed talking to each other today can follow up independently with each other?
I don't know that we have a complete list of who actually came.
Think about it. Okay. Well,
yeah.
it's useful. And if people want to reach out to each other in the remaining minutes that we have, it's useful to share an email, share
Exactly.
however you want to be reached out to. People won't broadcast it and won't litter you with stuff. We have time for two more. I wanted to make sure that Emily and Brett spoke, and then Barbara will come to you as well.
Thanks, Ari. So we were in a group with Ari, Walter, and Lita. So it was a smaller group, and so it was nice to be able to talk more thoroughly. I think we only got to the first question, maybe, but it touched on several of the broader themes that we had been talking about. We talked about, I think, one of the things that stood out from what we talked about was thinking about how extremism can also be like thinking of extremism in a good way in terms of showing radical empathy. And so Jesus also came up since he was also someone who had radical empathy and is from, was a Palestinian Jew. So that thread came up because we had Lita was describing also like her view as a Christian and believing in Jesus and the principles of Jesus. So that was one interesting kind of interfaith thread. And then those of us who are Jewish on the call, we were also like talking about how we all wrestle with Zionism. Although I think we also were saying, maybe the label, like we don't need to, what's the word? Deliberate on the label so much, maybe that's not so helpful sometimes. And we all agreed. And that I think Nazir had said before we went into the breakout groups that, that we should all support both Jews and Palestinians having the right to self-determination. And so for me personally, I think I shared, like, I think that that's a good place to start and try to get people together. And that's what I think these calls, these types
Great.
of events are really great for. But I agree also with what Najla was just saying, that it would be nice to have more time to get to talk to each other, because I agree, like it's actually very hard to get both sides to say like that you support the other side's right to self-determination, right? Like maybe that's the essence of the problem. So I think we've been to some of these events in person. I think, it's easier when you're in person to get to know each other. So hopefully, I know there will be more I'm from Florida. So when this long winter, awful winter, I'm from Florida, but in Maryland now. So when this horrible winter is over, we're looking forward to getting
Here,
together
here.
in person. Um,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Beautifully done. Barbara, you're the last one.
Hi. I was in a group with Ira, Kay, and Howard, and there was some disagreement about Zionism and how and the aspects of Zionism as it pertains to how the Israeli government is behaving, and there was a discussion about how the protests against Israel. Um, uh, there was, I guess, a difference of opinion as to the significance of how and why there seems to be many, many, many exponentially more protests against Israel than there are against regimes that are, authoritarian and pretty terrible. And one of the comments was that part of the reason why someone in the group felt that was happening is because um, it's American dollars that are supporting Israel, and that Jews have a special um, obligation to speak out against injustice. But it was also pointed out that there are hundreds of protests throughout the world against Israel, and not really against most other regimes, by people who are not Jewish and who are not American.
Okay. Dan, should we double back to Marc and allow for a rabbinic close from him, or no? I was teasing. Any thoughts of distilling what you've heard post breakout, Marc, and then Dan, you'll wrap us up.
Well, for balance, I'd like to hear from Nizar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We heard a little bit from Nizar defending his territory from Jim, but defending his position, I should say. But I think it's fitting for each of you, to offer some concluding thoughts, and then Dan will say goodnight to us.
Well, I just want to encourage people from what we've seen in conflicts around the world, that they seem impossible until suddenly there's a breakthrough. And so I really urge people to continue to pass this on to younger people, because even the most intractable conflicts in the world have turned into a coexistence where it was considered impossible until it actually happened. India, Pakistan, despite the nuclear weapons and despite the history of horror, are still coexisting, they've evolved into strong contemporary states for hundreds of millions of people. And I think we have to have faith here that the more that we interact and the more that we keep on building relations with each other, the harder it's going to be for people to get us to demonize each other and to not work together. I do think that that's what I do urge that the next time we have a chance, that the peace processes are not limited to a few wealthy people, and that really, really do take seriously the thoughts of women, of minorities, of poor people, because they really do have wisdom that changes history. We've seen this all over Africa. It has to happen here too.
Thank you. Nizar.
Yeah, Along the same lines that to be humble and realize that we don't know what we don't know, while my rational self cannot but see that we're hurtling towards the Armageddon, I've been wrong before. So just think of how improbable it was for the Oslo process to happen. In fact, in Northern Ireland, they were telling them the pressure they were getting in the 90s to settle was that they were telling, look, even the Palestinians and the Israelis are coming to an agreement, so you're gonna miss the train. So and also like something like, of all the people that could have removed settlements, it was Ariel Sharon who removed the settlements in Gaza, right? So realizing that there is that, and finally that each one of us, their job is, rather than to judge others and express frustration, think, what do I need to go through? What do I need to to have experience to think the way this other person think that I don't understand, right? That is something that's helpful to do, as opposed to just contribute to the binary and to the entrenchment. Not to say, oh, it's too complicated, or realizing that giving up is a manifestation of your privilege.
Beautiful. Dan.
Okay. I just wanted to thank everybody who has participated in this meeting and is still here, and especially the panelists. There really are not a whole lot of things that anybody said in that panel that many of us can disagree with. You guys were great, and we would love to have you speak again. On the topic du jour, I will say that as a Minnesota Viking fan, I'm starting to wonder if they will ever win a Super Bowl, but I have not given up on peace in the Middle East. I think that will happen first. Because we all want that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we just have to keep going at it. To the point about how JIDS needs to have more get-togethers, anybody who subscribes to that view, let's talk about how to make that happen and what kind of get-togethers you all want, because I agree that it's the personal interactions that can survive wars and whatnot. That will be what gives us, the impetus for peace. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'll speak to you all in a moment.
Dan, could I